At his father's birthday party, Ethan Mitchell's name tag read "The Disappointment." His stepmother Susan laughed with a smirk when she caught his gaze from across the room. "Well, it's true," her eyes seemed to say. That familiar mixture of disdain and satisfaction painted across her face. Ethan stood frozen, the elegant Manhattan designer suddenly feeling like the awkward teenager he had once been in this suffocating small town. The name tag trembled slightly between his fingers, the stark black letters a physical manifestation of what his family had always thought of him. Oakfield, Massachusetts remained unchanged, a postcard-perfect New England town with white picket fences and whispers that traveled faster than the autumn breeze. The grand colonial house where Robert Mitchell, respected local construction magnate, hosted his 60th birthday celebration was filled with the town's elite. Business associates, church members, and family friends mingled under crystal chandeliers, their polite laughter masking the undercurrents of judgment that had always run through this community. Ethan had only returned because of Aunt Jennifer's pleading voice on the phone. "Just this once," she'd said. "Maybe things can be different now." Jennifer, his father's younger sister and the only family member who'd ever truly accepted him, had always been his lifeline to a family that had otherwise cut him off. Her warm smile across the room was the only genuine welcome he'd received since arriving. The contrast between Ethan's life in New York and this stifling small-town atmosphere couldn't be more striking. Here, he wasn't Ethan Mitchell, the rising star who just won the Emerging Designer Award at New York Fashion Week. Here, he was just the disappointing son who'd rejected the family business, the family values, and the carefully constructed image his father and stepmother had built over decades. Susan glided through the party in her tailored dress, playing the perfect hostess while Madison, her daughter, flashed her enormous engagement ring. Her fiancé, the son of the local pastor, Tyler, his stepbrother, stood surrounded by former football teammates, discussing the latest expansion of the family construction business. The business that should have been partially Ethan's, had his college fund not mysteriously disappeared into his father's company and anti-gay marriage campaign donations. Ethan could feel the stares, could hear the whispers. "That's Robert's son." "Yes, the one who, you know." He straightened his designer jacket and took a deep breath. For years, he'd tried to maintain a superficial relationship with his family despite everything. He'd sent birthday cards, made obligatory holiday calls, and pretended the scars from his past didn't still burn. But something about this name tag, this blatant display of contempt, ignited a fire within him. The old Ethan would have quietly placed the name tag back on the table and slipped away unnoticed. But he wasn't that scared boy anymore. With steady hands, he picked up the tag and pinned it directly to his chest. The word disappointment now prominently displayed as he walked toward the center of the room. If they wanted to label him, he would wear it proudly before he showed them exactly who he had become. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to follow Heart Stories, where we share powerful narratives of those who found strength by embracing their authentic selves, even when those closest to them couldn't. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't staying, it's knowing when to walk away. The weight of Ethan's past pressed against his chest with each step through his father's crowded living room. His journey to this moment had begun over 2 decades ago, when his parents' marriage dissolved like sugar in rain. Ethan was 10 when Lisa packed her bags and headed west to California, leaving him with Robert, a man who expressed love through achievement rather than acceptance. Within a year, Susan appeared with her ready-made family, Tyler and Madison, both golden-haired and athletically gifted, perfect additions to Robert's vision of an all-American family. Ethan still remembered the day he realized he was different. 14 years old, sitting in biology class, feeling his heart race whenever Jason Barnes smiled at him from across the lab table. While other boys talked about girls at sleepovers, Ethan found himself watching how the moonlight played across Jason's face during their late-night conversations. When he finally gathered the courage to tell his mother during one of their monthly phone calls, Lisa had fallen silent before whispering, "I love you, no matter what, but maybe keep this between us for now." Her protection came from knowledge she knew Robert better than anyone. 2 years later, the carefully constructed dam broke. Robert discovered texts between Ethan and his first boyfriend, innocent messages filled with heart emojis and plans for the school dance. The explosion that followed left wounds that never properly healed. "No son of mine," Robert had thundered, his face contorted with rage. Within days, Ethan found himself shipped off to New Light Path, a religious conversion post nestled in the woods of rural Maine. Summer days filled with Bible verses, masculine reinforcement activities, and tearful group confessions where teenagers were forced to renounce their unnatural desires. Tyler knew. He'd overheard everything but remained silent, caught between loyalty to his stepfather and the growing discomfort in his conscience. Once, he slipped a candy bar under Ethan's door with a hastily scribbled note. "This sucks. Hang in there." It wasn't much, but in Ethan's desert of support, it was a single drop of water enough to keep hope alive. When Ethan returned from camp, outwardly subdued but inwardly more certain of himself than ever, he discovered another betrayal. The college fund his biological mother had established in the divorce settlement, protected money meant to secure his future, had been drained. Robert's explanation came with cold practicality. The business needed capital, and Tyler's showing real promise in construction management. "Your fashion sketches won't pay bills." The unspoken message rang clear: Tyler was the son worth investing in. What Robert never mentioned was how portions of that money had found their way into donation boxes for the Traditional Family Values Coalition, whose billboards against same-sex marriage lined the highways leading out of Oakfield. Ethan learned this later, through Aunt Jennifer's reluctant confession after he'd moved away. High school graduation couldn't come quickly enough. While his classmates celebrated, Ethan packed everything he owned into 2 suitcases, a bus ticket to New York City, purchased with saved birthday money from Lisa and Jennifer, became his passport to freedom. The journey from Oakfield to Manhattan might as well have been interplanetary travel, moving from a world of rigid conformity to one where difference was celebrated, not condemned. Starting at the bottom, Ethan swept floors at a garment district workshop, collected fabric scraps, and studied design books at the public library until the pages were worn from his touch. Nights were spent in a shoebox apartment shared with 3 other dreamers, all of them sketching visions of better tomorrows. His first real break came when a boutique owner noticed his self-made jacket, an upcycled creation born of necessity and imagination. Small commissions led to bigger opportunities. Rejection fueled determination. Each no pushed Ethan to work harder, stay later, dream bigger, until finally, the fashion world began to take notice of the boy from Massachusetts who could transform painful memories into wearable art. Through it all, Robert and Susan remained peripheral characters in Ethan's story, present only through occasional strained phone calls and holiday cards addressed to Ethan without a personal message. The silence between them spoke volumes about wounds too deep for casual conversation. Yet somehow, the absence of their approval gradually stopped defining Ethan's worth. In finding himself, he discovered that sometimes family is less about blood and more about who sees your true colors and still chooses to stand beside you. The Mitchell household buzzed with pre-Thanksgiving anticipation, conversations peppered with mentions of upcoming family gatherings. Ethan clutched the elegantly wrapped box containing the Omega watch he'd selected for his father, a peace offering that had cost nearly a month's rent. Yet when he presented it, Robert barely glanced inside before setting it aside with a perfunctory, "Thanks, son." The dismissal stung like salt in a paper cut small but searing. From across the room, Ethan observed Tyler commanding attention with animated descriptions of the Mitchell Construction Company's latest commercial development. "Biggest contract in company history," Tyler boasted, clapping Robert on the shoulder. Nearby, Madison twirled, her engagement ring catching the light as she detailed wedding plans to a circle of admiring relatives. "Pastor Williams says we can use the main sanctuary. They usually reserve it for prominent families," she explained, voice dripping with manufactured humility. Neither acknowledged Ethan beyond cursory nods. He had become a ghost in his childhood home, visible yet unseen. While he'd anticipated coolness, the deliberate erasure of his accomplishments cut deeper than expected. Not one person had mentioned his recent feature in Vogue or the celebrities now wearing his designs. In their narrative, his success didn't exist because it didn't fit their definition of achievement. Moving toward the refreshment table, Ethan overheard a conversation that stopped him cold. His father and a silver-haired man were discussing campaign contributions. "Thompson's strong on traditional values," Robert said. "He's promised to reverse those marriage protections if elected. I've committed $15,000 to his campaign." The same father who claimed he couldn't afford Ethan's education had money for political candidates working to undermine his son's basic rights. Even more disturbing was the hushed exchange between Robert and his attorney in the study, a room Ethan had been expressly forbidden to enter as a child, but now found himself passing while searching for the bathroom. "We should finalize the updated will before year-end," the attorney advised. "With Madison's wedding and Tyler's promotion, it's time to secure the legacy." Robert's response was measured but clear. "Ethan will receive a token amount. Can't disown him entirely, appearances matter, but the bulk should go to those carrying forward the family name and values." Retreating to the kitchen where Aunt Jennifer was arranging dessert trays, Ethan fought to maintain composure. "You won your award," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "The one you mentioned in your email." "Why didn't you tell them?" Ethan shrugged, the familiar weight of invisibility settling across his shoulders. "They didn't ask. Besides, what would it matter? A fashion award isn't exactly hanging sheetrock or marrying a pastor's son." Jennifer's eyes reflected decades of witnessing her brother's coldness. "This family has always had a narrow definition of success," she sighed. "Maybe too narrow to contain someone like you." The evening deteriorated further when Ethan encountered Michael Donovan, his high school boyfriend now married to Rebecca from their graduating class. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he introduced his wife and 2-year-old daughter. "Great to see you doing so well, Ethan," he offered with hollow cheerfulness, while his eyes telegraphed a different message, silent desperation. Here stood the path Ethan might have taken, compromise disguised as conformity, a life half-lived to maintain approval. As guests migrated to the dining room, Ethan noticed Susan huddled with Robert and Pastor Williams, their glances darting toward him repeatedly. He recognized the formation, the same triangulation that preceded his being sent to conversion therapy. They were planning something. Later, he confirmed his suspicions when Madison accidentally revealed their intentions. "Dad says after dinner, Pastor Williams wants to speak with you about lifestyle choices. It's because we care." The audacity was breathtaking. Years of therapy, hard-won self-acceptance, and professional success. Yet they still viewed him as broken, still believed they had the right to fix him. Something crystallized in Ethan at that moment, a clarity about why he'd really come back. Not for reconciliation, but for resolution. To finally close a chapter that had remained painfully open. When Robert tapped his glass, signaling time for birthday toasts, Ethan saw his opportunity. Before the pastor could begin his prepared remarks, Ethan reached for his own water glass. The soft chime as he tapped it drew every eye in the room, surprise registering on faces unaccustomed to him, commanding attention. Standing straight, channeling the confidence that had carried him through Fashion Week presentations, Ethan prepared to speak his truth at last. The room fell silent as the prodigal son cleared his throat, the disappointment name tag still defiantly pinned to his chest. Crystal stemware glinted under chandelier light as Ethan raised his glass, commanding a silence so complete that the antique grandfather clock's ticking resonated through the dining room. His designer's eye noted the tableau before him, faces frozen in expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. The Mitchell family crest hanging prominently behind his father's chair, Susan's manicured hand gripping her napkin with whitening knuckles. "To my father," Ethan began, his voice steadier than the nervous flutter in his chest. "For bringing us all together on this special occasion." A collective exhale rippled through the guests, relieved by the apparent conventionality of his opening. Robert nodded curtly, already dismissing whatever might follow. "When I arrived today, I found something interesting at the welcome table." Ethan gestured to his name tag. Most people had their names. I had a title, The Disappointment. At first, I considered removing it. Then I realized perhaps it's appropriate. After all, I have been a disappointment by certain standards. Susan's smirk faltered as murmurs circulated among the guests. Ethan continued, his tone measured. I disappointed you by not wanting to swing hammers for Mitchell Construction. I disappointed you by preferring art to athletics. But mostly I disappointed you by being exactly who I am, something I never had any control over. The room temperature seemed to drop as Ethan's words hit their mark. What many of you don't know is how thoroughly disappointment was communicated to me. At 16, just after discovering I was gay, my father sent me to a conversion therapy camp where teenagers were taught to hate themselves. Gasps punctuated his revelation. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward exits. 3 months of psychological torture paid for with my college fund money my mother had legally set aside for my education. The same fund that mysteriously disappeared when I wanted to study fashion design. Ethan's gaze locked with Robert's, whose complexion had paled considerably. The same money that apparently found its way into anti-gay marriage campaigns and, from what I overheard tonight, continues funding politicians who believe people like me deserve fewer rights. Pastor Williams rose halfway from his seat before Robert motioned him down. The Mitchell patriarch clearly preferred handling this situation privately, but Ethan had spent too many years in silence. I left Oakfield with 2 suitcases and no financial support. I slept on floors, worked night shifts after design classes, and collected fabric scraps other designers discarded. Emotion thickened Ethan's voice as years of suppressed feelings surfaced. I started as a janitor in garment workshops. Now celebrities wear my designs. Last month, I won the National Design Award, not that anyone here would know or care. Madison stared into her lap while Susan maintained her frozen smile, though it no longer reached her eyes. Several guests whispered behind raised hands. Throughout everything, I kept reaching back, sending birthday cards, making holiday calls, hoping for even the smallest acknowledgement that I belonged in this family. Tonight, I finally understood why that acknowledgement never came. Ethan gestured toward the study. I wasn't meant to hear the conversation about the will, about leaving me a token amount while securing the family legacy, but perhaps I needed to hear it. Turning to Susan, Ethan's voice gained strength. You've labeled me the disappointment since you married my father. You made sure I knew I wasn't welcome in your perfect family picture. Every time I achieved something, you diminished it. Every time I reached out, you ensured my hand grasped empty air. Facing his father directly, Ethan continued, and you, Dad, you taught me that your love was conditional, that I could only be your son if I pretended to be someone else. You chose your reputation in this town over your own child's well-being. Robert finally found his voice, rising from his chair. That's enough. Ethan, you've made your point. No, I haven't, not quite. Ethan's smile held no warmth. The point is this, I came here hoping something had changed, that maybe time had softened hard hearts. Instead, I found the same judgment, the same conditional acceptance, and now a pastor waiting to ambush me with another attempt to fix who I am. Lifting his glass higher, Ethan delivered his final words. So here's my real toast to the last time you'll ever see me unless something fundamentally changes. To boundaries that protect my hard-won peace. To David, my partner of 3 years, a brilliant surgeon you've never bothered to meet, who showed me what unconditional love actually looks like. The silence that followed was shattered by an unexpected voice. Tyler stood, his expression torn between decades of loyalty to Robert and something new, perhaps respect for the brother who had found courage he himself had lacked. Ethan's right, Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. We've treated him terribly. All of us. His eyes met Ethan's, conveying years of unspoken regret. And I'm done pretending it's okay. The room erupted in chaos as Tyler placed his napkin on the table and moved to stand beside his stepbrother. Together, they walked toward the door, leaving behind stunned silence and the weight of uncomfortable truths finally spoken aloud. In that moment, Ethan understood that sometimes healing begins only after you stop bleeding for people who never bothered to notice your wounds. Cold Massachusetts air hit Ethan's face as the Mitchell family's front door closed behind him, Tyler following close behind. The weight that had pressed against his chest for years seemed to lift with each step down the familiar driveway. Neither spoke until they reached Ethan's rental car, the engine's gentle purr breaking the night's stillness. "That was 15 years overdue," Tyler finally said, his voice cracking slightly. He stared straight ahead, hands jammed into his pockets. "I should have stood up for you back then, when Dad found those texts, when he sent you away." The admission hung between them, fragile as breath in winter air. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening. Why now? The question contained multitudes. Why defend him now? Why risk everything now? Why care now? "Because I've been living half a life trying to be everything he wanted," Tyler confessed. "Watching you tonight, owning who you are despite everything, made me realize how much I've compromised myself." A rueful smile crossed his face. "Besides, Madison's been reading your interviews online. She's not as aligned with Susan's worldview as they think." 2 weeks later, an email notification illuminated Ethan's phone screen while he sketched in his Manhattan loft. Madison's name appeared unexpectedly in his inbox. The message was brief but contained something unprecedented: questions rather than judgments. She'd begun wondering about the church's teachings, about why family loyalty seemingly required rejecting someone for their identity. Her engagement didn't feature in the message. Neither did wedding plans. Instead, she asked if they might talk sometime, really talk, without their parents' narrative coloring the conversation. Aunt Jennifer, true to her mediator role, orchestrated a small dinner at her New York pied-à-terre. She invited Ethan, suggested he bring David, and promised no ambushes this time. The evening unfolded with tentative steps toward understanding Jennifer's gentle guidance, creating space for wounds to breathe without festering further. When Robert finally called, Ethan almost declined the call. His thumb hovered over the red button before curiosity prevailed. His father's voice sounded older, diminished somehow. The conversation remained stiff, circling around weather and local news before Robert cleared his throat. "Susan and I are seeing a new pastor at church," he offered awkwardly. "More progressive than Williams. He has a son like you." The words were far from an apology, yet they contained the first hint that perhaps Robert's rigid worldview had developed hairline cracks. Not enough for full reconciliation, but perhaps enough to begin a different kind of conversation. As spring bloomed in New York, Ethan and David finalized plans for their engagement party. Standing in their kitchen, Ethan held envelopes addressed to Oakfield, Massachusetts invitations that might never be acknowledged, but represented an open door nonetheless. David squeezed his shoulder, understanding the significance of the gesture. "Are you sure?" David asked softly. His surgeon's hands, capable of such precision and healing, had helped stitch together the frayed edges of Ethan's heart over the past 3 years. "No," Ethan admitted, "but I'm sure about my boundaries. They can come as family who accepts us both, or they can stay home. Either way, I'm not hiding anymore." Later that evening, Ethan's phone chimed with an incoming email. Robert's name appeared a rarity that still triggered a complex emotional response. The message contained just 9 words. "Ethan, we need to talk." Dad, attached, was a confirmation for a flight to New York the following weekend. No conditions, no pastor accompanying him. Just a father finally making the journey his son had been forced to make alone years before. Ethan showed the email to David, who wrapped him in a protective embrace. The path forward remained uncertain. Decades of hurt couldn't be erased with a plane ticket or a brief message. Yet something had shifted, creating space for possibilities neither had imagined weeks earlier. Standing by their apartment window overlooking the city lights, Ethan reflected on how far he'd traveled from that name tag at the birthday party. The disappointment had never been his to carry. It belonged to those too afraid to embrace the brilliance of differences, too concerned with appearances to recognize the courage living authentically requires. What would you do if faced with family who couldn't accept your true self? Would you keep trying to build bridges? Or would you create firm boundaries to protect your peace? Sometimes the privacy act isn't cutting ties or maintaining them. It's determining which relationships deserve the gift of your vulnerability. Follow Heart Stories for more powerful narratives about finding strength through authenticity and learning that family can be both born and chosen.